It's Tuesday, May 17th, 2016. It's time for WorthPoint Chats with Harry Rinker. I'm Greg Watkins, the editor at WorthPoint, and here is Harry. How are you doing today, Harry?
Hey, I'm doing great, and it's fun. We try to do these talks every Tuesday afternoon too, and they stream live. I mean, we record them and put them up on YouTube, but if somebody would like to come on board and watch us talking about this stuff, the reason I mention that, by the way, is there is a little chat box on the side of this if you're up watching on YouTube streaming live, and you can actually ask a question while we're in the middle of all of this rather than have me pontificate or do whatever. And I get a little nervous about that at times. Now that I'm, quote unquote, an elder statesman in the trade, I get to pontificate perhaps more than I should. What do you think?
That's why people tune in, Harry. They want to hear what you have to say about the antiques and collectibles, and so I wouldn't worry if you tend to hold forth.
Well, okay. Well, we're gonna start this session today. We've got two objects to look at as part of the session today too. But we're going to start the session today looking at a recent auction by Heritage. Now, Heritage Auction is a very interesting firm. It's located in Dallas, Texas. We've talked about Heritage in the past, and Heritage now sells more objects online than any of the other leading auction firms in the U.S., although I suspect it may well be in the world. But anyway, certainly in the U.S., they just put out an announcement some time ago. But it's a company that has now a number of divisions, and one of which is its collectibles division. Now, normally, when there's a collectibles division sale, I'm expecting a sale of all political memorabilia or some kind of Americana or something like that. And they recently did a sale of an Americana auction, and the total amount was only $805,000. Now you think, oh, $805,000, that's a lot of money. But if you look and follow the auction reports of the trade papers, whether it's Bain Antique Digest or Antique Week or Collectors News or any one of the other papers like that, you frequently hear today of $1 million sales. I mean, $1 million is not a lot of money anymore in terms of auction sales. And so I was a little taken back when the Americana sale here did not as well as I would have thought it was. And there were a lot of lots in here. But let's talk about some of the lots that were at the sale. First of all, there was what was called the Two Hemispheres bandwagon from Barnum and Bailey. Now, this is one of the most famous of all the circus wagons. And, with circus museums in Sarasota and up in Baraboo, and with what used to be a huge collector market in circus items, I would have thought this thing would have gone through the roof. It sold, well, I mean, roof is a relative term in our business, but it only brought $250,000. Now, $250,000 is a lot of money, but only $250,000. I would have thought that it would have pushed double that or more. I mean, this is probably one of the most famous circuit wagons of all times. I would have thought Ripley's Believe It or Not would have paid more than that for it. And I don't know if Ripley was the final buyer, because right now they don't know who bought that. I believe that's right, Craig, because I think we have one of our WorthPoint worthologists working on this, trying to figure out who the buyer was, do we not?
That's right. Larry Kellogg, who's our circus worthologist and who has actually done a lot of PR work for some of the circuses. He is investigating. Right now, the only thing that we know about the buyer is he's Canadian.
Oh, really? It's going to go outside the U.S.?
Yeah. So Larry's got a line on him, and he'll be doing an article about this particular item in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I would have suspected that it would have gone to one of the two major museums, or it would have gone over to the Arabic countries, because the Saudis love the top of the line in anything right now, and maybe the lack of the oil boom at the moment is taking them out of the market. But it was a little bit disappointing. There were also two items in the sale that fascinated me, and again, I suppose had I seriously tracked them, I'm not sure I wouldn't have been a bidder for at least one of them. But there was a small swath of fabric from the Wright brothers plane, the one that made the first flight at Kitty Hawk. No, that's the hair. There you go, right?
Yeah.
You got it up on the screen now. And that brought, let's see here, well, to $11,250. And I thought, heck, that's not a lot of money. Again, for this, pieces of things. I've often seen pieces of Hindenburgs and dirigibles that blew up, the Akron and some of the other ones. They frequently show up in the market. Timber from old buildings, pieces of ships. These historical relics are there. And, come on, there wasn't a lot of plane to chop up here in terms of this. And I would have thought that was higher. But the one that threw me for a loop, and I have to tell you, was they offered 14 strands of Thomas Jefferson's hair. Now, okay, every time I see somebody trying to sell somebody's hair, I think of the movie The Shootist. You know The Shootist, the one with John Wayne where he was...
Right.
He's dying, right?
Yes.
So he's in the barber shop, right? And the undertaker comes in and tries to offer him a deal, and he says, "You're going to pay me to handle my funeral." Remember that?
Yes.
The barber is sweeping up his hair because he says he can. And then the barber just goes over to the next chair and sweeps up some more hair. And,
right.
And whatever.
We're all pile of it.
Yes, exactly. So here we are. 14 strands of Thomas Jefferson hair. Now, the thing about it is these are pretty well authenticated. I mean, they were cut by the physician at the time of Jefferson's death. And, he's an interesting death. He died on July 4th, 1826, which is the 50th anniversary, of the Declaration of Independence. By the way, FYI, this is one of those trivia questions. Another president died the same day. Do you know who it was?
Wasn't it John Adams?
Yes, it was. Good for you. You're boning up on your history and everything now that you want to look into the teaching field. Yeah, but it's there. But apparently the bulk of the hair that was cut is at Monticello. I mean, it's still safe. But for a mere $6,875, but gosh knows how far the other guy would have gone if he had competition. But I'm not sure I wouldn't have been a bidder for that.
And that's only about $500 a strand.
Yeah, well, $491 to be precise. Now I don't know. I suppose you could encapsulate it and sell it by the strand, which I don't think this guy is likely to do. The other thing is that there was no DNA test. How do we know? But anyway.
Well, evidently there was a letter involved with it.
There was a lot of things involved, but the thing is, we want to believe so bad that we never question any of this stuff. Okay, and that's one of the big issues in the antiques and collectibles field is anybody can write a letter, anybody can do anything, and you have to be real careful with these provenances. But I just thought it would be neat. Now there are locks of George Washington's hair all over the place, and a lot of other things too. And I think I remember, didn't they clip a lot of Lincoln's hair too when he died, right?
I don't know, but I would assume that they probably did.
They did. Well, they made life masks. You remember?
Yes. Yes.
And the Lincoln. In fact, you probably have some Lincoln life masks on WorthPoint. Well, enough of all this silliness. I just think this kind of stuff falls into the neat and unusual. What surprised me is how, as I said, for the right plane for the piece of fabric from the right plane, and for this one, I'm surprised how little they sold for. I don't think they would have sold for that little 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And I now I'm getting concerned about market shifts and market pricing shifts. And this was a big collectible 50 years ago. This is what people collected, pieces of things. And I just wonder if it's a dying art. Nobody's building. I don't know. Did Ripley corner the market on all the good stuff or what here? I don't know. Well, anyway, enough of this silliness. I got a couple of images in this week and I thought we'd talk about two of them because they're fun.
Okay. So before we do that, let's talk about how we can get these items in for us to talk about. Oh, yes. Look, we would love to hear from you, whether it's a question or an object you'd like to write us about. Here's the address that you can use, community@worthpoint.com. That's just community@worthpoint.com. Now, if you're going to send a question, send a detailed one so we know who you are and we'll be glad to talk about it. Maybe you have a question about how the trade works. You want me to comment further on some of the things I said in these chats. The other thing is, if you're going to send an image, send multiple pictures of it and detailed size, markings. The one we're going to talk about next is an image of a carriage that came in. Now, here is a carriage, and in it is a doll. And
what happened is somebody bought a home and this was left behind. Now, I try to tell people, when things are left behind in a home and not taken, I assure you, literally assure you, that people don't care about them. Now you say, well, why wouldn't they care about this neat baby carriage or doll? Okay, now this is a test for Craig. Craig attended the Institute for the Study of Antiques and Collectibles authenticating class last year. What's the first rule of authenticating, Craig? Do you remember?
Well, you have to question everything.
Well, that's the philosophy. But the first rule is, if it looks new, assume it is new.
Right.
Okay, and here is what appears to be a maybe 75 to 100-year-old plus baby carriage with a doll in it. But that doll doesn't look like any old doll. It looks new, and the carriage looks new to me too. Now, there are a lot of other giveaways. Look at the open Bentwood aspect of that carriage. Now, come on, I've seen Bentwood carriages and they're exquisite, and this one is just pushing the limits. And so this is one of these things, when I see something and I haven't seen one before, the first thought people have is, oh, it must be rare, it must be unusual. Well, my alarm bell goes and says repro or fake or something. Well, anyway, so it just didn't look right to me. So then if you take a look at some of the other images, one of the other rules we have is, if it looks new, assume it is new, is where is the wear? Well, you want to find wear and discoloration. If this is a 100-year-old carriage, you don't want the bonnet to come up and look like it's brand new fabric, right?
Right.
Well, they relined it, somebody could say. But there's no wear on the wood anywhere. Not on the handle, not on the wheels. And then we go down to look at the wheels, and the wheel construction is really flimsy. Let's see, there's another view from the carriage, but here are the wheels, and you don't see wear on them anywhere. And so the rule of thumb is, if there's no wear or anything else like that, it's new. What this is probably a reproduction carriage and a reproduction doll from the 80s or 90s, maybe even later. Value-wise on the marketplace, it still has a $50, $75, $100 kind of value, but that is not a period carriage. I'm doing this, of course, from the images that were sent to me, and the person that found it was, very clear about the source of its origin. He wasn't claiming it was old. In fact, he wasn't certain at all. So this was one of those cases where, when you work on authenticating, or when you work on anything you collect, you have to develop what we call mental vocabularies. And if you're, for example, looking at baby wagons, right, what you really need to do is have a mental vocabulary of what baby carriages or baby wagons look like historically. Every time you see one that's in a museum or authenticated, you put that image in your mind. And then the thing is, everybody says, well, that one's different, that's unusual. But the point is, people don't want things that are different. People want things that look like everything else. You're going to keep up with the Joneses. You want what the Joneses have. You don't want something that looks like the Joneses have or is different than the Joneses have. And people don't understand that aspect of it. It takes a lot to deal with it. So that's kind of a fun piece. And, it's one of those things where, again, if you looked on WorthPoint.com, and I forget, do you call it the Worthopedia, or what? How do you refer to the prices on WorthPoint?
The database of sales results is the Worthopedia.
It's the Worthopedia, right?
Right.
Yeah, and the Worthopedia. By the way, I want to put a plug in for the Worthopedia. It may surprise you to hear what I'm about to say, but I used to tell people, if you were trying to attack the antique and collectibles trade, find one printed price guide, whether it was Worman's or Kobol's or Schroeder's or the Antique Trade or whatever, and buy it every year. And try to develop anywhere from 5 to 10 editions of that on a shelf. That way you could track a category. Say you were trying to track Roseville, right?
Right.
Well, what you could do is, as you go into each one of those, even though the objects may not be the same, you'll get a feel for how prices changed over the last 10 years. Over the last 10 years, and so you have some idea of market movement. So let's suppose you find an object in the first or second year and not in the 10th year, but as you watch how the market adjusted price-wise, you can adjust the earlier prices and get it. this is one of the things that makes the Worthopedia very unique, Craig, and that is that you have prices going back to 2006, 2008 in there all the way up to the present time. So when you do a search on the Worthopedia, you get the most recent prices, but if you keep drilling down, you get the change of prices from the years before as well, right?
Right, and you can set the search to sort by sales date, or by price, or by keywords. So if you search by sales date, you'll just get them in a row, and you can see the prices as time marches on.
And that's very important to understand how market movement takes place. Really, it is. Well, speaking of that, let's show them how that works. I got an interesting email in. Oh, well, you know what we'll do? Let's talk about the second object, and we'll talk about the other story. We go a little out of order here. I got a second object email in about a rocking chair made by the Paine Furniture Company up in Boston, New York. Now we're going to show you the rocker. Then we're going to go to labels for a second here, and here is the label that's on the bottom of that rocker, a paper label, and then a metal label that says Paine Furniture Boston. And although it's very hard to read, even though it's very hard to read, oh, sorry about that. I forgot to turn off my phone. We're just going to ignore it. We're just going to ignore it here. What's happening here? What's happening here is that this label has a 66 and a 10, what looks like 113 here. I'm getting an odd. Sorry about the distraction. Besides the phone, I was getting an odd distraction at my battery.
No, that was my battery, Harry.
Oh, that's your battery that's running.
Yeah.
That's
Sorry.
Good. Anyway, so here's the label. Now, I went up on the internet, and my gosh, I found about a dozen labels for this Paine Furniture Company. It started in the 1830s with a cabinet maker, and then he had an apprentice named Paine, who obviously married his daughter, and so this thing came down through a number of families. But we'll get back to this label in a minute. But anyway, let's go back to the chair. This company started by the 1880s. It had evolved from a cabinet shop in Boston to a major manufacturer of furniture. And if you go up on the internet, you will find in the Boston Public Library a copy of the 1880 catalog from Paine, and you can pull up the catalog and flip the pages. I mean, I just thoroughly enjoyed it. If you ever wondered about the breadth and depth of furniture makers in the 19th century, how many different styles did they do, how many different forms and shapes of furniture did they do, this catalog is a mind-boggling experience to go through. Anyway, this is a rocker, and Craig just kind of showed you the style. It's a Boston style rocker. Now, they made Boston style rockers in the end of the 19th century, and they make Boston style rockers today. So the question is, when was this made? Well, I went through every page in the 1880 catalog and didn't find it. And I suspect by the label and the thing on the bottom, it is a 20th century product, whether from the 20s or 30s or from the 40s or 50s. It's certainly mid 20th century. But what is interesting totally about this rocker is that it is in an older style, a Windsor style, and Paine Furniture Company eventually moved into downtown Boston and built this huge building in 1908 or the beginning of the 20th century that stayed in the family almost to the end of the 20th century and is a historic landmark building. Now, strangely enough, the family, they sold the Paine building and so forth and went out. But the sixth generation of the family now runs a patio shop in Bolton, Massachusetts. But we won't go there. Well, let's go back to the chair, right? Let's go back to the label.
All right.
Now, the label says 66. Yeah, you had it blown up there. 66 1013. Now, my guess is 66 means 1966. That this is a mid 20th century copy, and the 103 is a stock number. Give me a dozen 1013s, and you get a dozen of these rockers. Now, okay, does it make any difference whether this was made in 1966 or it was made in 1940 or 1935? No, it is what it is. It's just a generic Boston rocker, but nicely marked. And this is fun too, because when you start to do research work on pieces of furniture made by this company, what you find out is there's a big market for the stuff in New England. I mean, Skinner sells the stuff at auction. Now, obviously, the pieces that people like are the big dining room suites and living room suites or big case pieces, wardrobes and that type of stuff. Chairs are a tough sell. Well, what I did then is I went to WorthPoint and said, okay, I'm going to click on WorthPoint and do this. And you've done that, Greg, right? Let's see. Let's show you. Now, what did you put in the search engine there?
Paine Furniture Windsor chair here.
Right. And so
I didn't put rocker, but
no, but that's okay. If you put rocker, I don't think you'll turn up anything because I didn't, but maybe. But anyway, but there's a chance to look at those things. Now, one of the first things you notice is the prices aren't particularly strong, really. Let's take a few of the examples that are there. Just read off some of the prices, Greg.
Okay, so 48 for the first two, and it looks like that's a duplicate.
Maybe a detail of that one, right?
Then the third one is 125. The black one is 200. The comeback Windsor rocking chair is 265.
All right, good. Now, the thing about that is one of the things, and as you see, that's a little different because it's got that comeback on the top of
right.
It's got a different back on it too. So there's what we would call a comparable price of 265, but that's probably on the high side. The rocker we're looking at is very plain and so forth. So you probably say, okay, maybe half of that value, maybe 100 to 100 and a quarter, maybe a little bit more. But if it's in New England, they'd probably price it higher. The other thing too is look at all these pieces, whether they're from the 1920s, 30s, or 50s or 60s. They're all selling cheaper than new. If you went out and tried to buy, now you could go down to Crate and Barrel and buy a rocker off the front porch for $130. But if you go out and try to buy a new, well-made, like that comeback Windsor rocker that we looked at for 200 and some odd dollars, you go out and try to buy that on the marketplace, right?
Right.
And that's cheaper than new. You'll pay 3-4 times that for a chair of that quality. And this is one of the things that, frustrates me a lot with younger people that want something new. They would go buy a new one and pay 3 times the price when they can get a good quality older one with some vintage and age to it and not pay anywhere near as much. But it was fine. It was a fun thing to research work because I love researching histories of companies. And again, let's throw up that billboard or whatever we have that shows how people can write us. We really need to get you to send in some images and so forth you'd like us to research and talk about it. It's very simple. You just go to community at worthpoint.com, community at worthpoint.com, right in there, and you can submit a question about an object. Now, again, please make sure you give us a lot of detailed information about it, size, markings, how you acquired it, maybe what you paid for it. And also, you'll notice that we tend to favor those questions that have multiple pictures in there where we can show marks and whatever, so we can use this as an educational tool. And there it is, community at worthpoint.com. But if you just have a general comment or a question about the trade you'd like to ask, community at worthpoint.com works just as well on that. Well, we kind of got a little out of order there, taking 2 objects in a row, which means we're going to go back to an article. And I was talking with my friend Don Herlocker, who is an expert on dolls, and she said, "Hey Harry, do you get antiques and auction news?" Now I don't, because Antique and Auction News is the insert of the Newtown Bee that comes out every week, and it's a fun paper. I mean, I got plenty of trade papers. I can't track everything, but she says there was this really interesting article by Andrew Richmond about selling stuff. And she said, I'm going to just send you the paper. And she did. And we have it up here. But Andrew Richmond was a former auctioneer. And I want to read his opening paragraph. I know it sounds like I'm trying to do it. But Andrew says, when I was a full-time auctioneer, I always felt that one of my most important jobs was to manage my sellers' expectations. And that's a key word. I mean, that's a key thing to this, my seller's expectation. In other words, help them get as clear a picture as possible of their likely sale results. The reason I did this was quite simple. In most cases, when I'd help a lifelong collector sell his or her collection, the last interaction that person had with their collection was a settlement check. And to some extent, it didn't really matter how great the service I gave them was, or how fantastic the catalog looked, or how big the sale day crowd was. If that check was smaller than they expected, that seller was likely to be unhappy. Ho, ho! Is he right on the money? Truth be told, this, in my opinion, is the greatest frustration of the auctioneer. The single biggest factor to seller satisfaction with their sale auction experience is one thing the auctioneer cannot control: the prices. Well, boy, is he right. I wouldn't want to be an auctioneer. In fact, I frequently get hired by auctioneers when they encounter an old-time collector whose stuff has hit the tank or whose prices have slipped enormously. I get called in to go in and talk to the people and try to tell them the truth about what's going to happen when they sell them. I mean, when I have a client who wants to sell something at auction, Greg, I make several rules before working with it. I said, one, you will promise me you will not attend the auction. Because if a collector goes to an auction and watches his stuff sold, and and by the way, Greg, I didn't attend any of the auctions of my stuff from the school. I didn't go at all. Not only that, I didn't even read the reports. And the reason is because if you go, what happens is you see all the stuff that you think should have gone for more go for little. What you never see is the stuff you didn't pay anything for that brought hundreds of dollars. But it's totally frustrating. I mean, I had a client one time go to an auction and she started bidding to buy back her stuff. The auctioneer actually had to stop. When the auctioneer had to stop the auction, we had to talk to her and said, look, it's the end result we're after here, okay? Not anything else. But you know, it's hard for collectors to see that type of thing. You know, I write a weekly column, which by the way appears on WorthPoint, right? Rinker on collectibles.
Yes.
I'm now in my 29th year. That's a feature on WorthPoint. And I'm going to write a column soon coming up called, "What do you mean my stuff isn't worth more than I paid for it when I sell it?" Column. Because the truth of the matter is that isn't true anymore. Dawn Herlocker, who I mentioned to you earlier, just sold her entire doll inventory. She was one of the leading doll dealers for 30 years in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and 2000s, and over 30 years. And she got about 30, 40 cents on the dollar. And she was happy to get it. But the problem is, the whole thing is blame the auctioneer. One time I got a call from an auctioneer and said, got approached by this client who has 1,000 pattern gas goblets. Do you think we should take the auction, or what should we do? They said. I said, find the auctioneer you hate the most and tell her he's the guy. Because, let him get blamed for the fact that they can't sell them. But today the auctioneer is under a lot of stress. Now, fortunately, he has a lot of avenues. He has the in-seat bidders, the telephone bidders, the internet bidders, and whatever. He'll do the best he can, but the market is in tremendous flux. Now, that's another thing you can see when you search things on the Worthopedia. You will see huge price shifts between years on some of the objects, similar objects, as a matter of fact, right?
Yes, yeah. The prices will vary quite a bit, and it really just has to do with supply and demand. There isn't a demand for a lot of the things that people collected. Yeah,
poor Tom's hair. I mean, not a big demand at only $491 a strand. What can we say, right?
Right.
And then they had to lump it in a lot. We couldn't sell it by the strand. I don't know what would happen if they tried to sell it by the strand. Probably not even bring that much. But Richmond, and this article is called A Reality Check, and you had it up on the screen. And for somebody who would like to read the full article, just go to antiquesandauctionnews.net. It's antiques with an S, and auctionnews.net. Do a search under Andrew Richmond, Richmond, and the article is called A Reality Check. The article goes on to talk about the fact that, what should a person be happy with when he sells a collection? And, it's the standard justification that, well, you should be glad you live with it, you're glad you owned it, glad to have all of this thing. But in the final analysis, it's all about the check. It's all about what it's worth. Well, the answer is worth is there are no fixed value. You know, I think people think antiques and collectibles are like the stock market, that you can go up in the computer 4 times a day and check the Dow Jones Industrial Average and watch the value of your goods move up and down. I just had to do a search, an interesting search here this past week on when was the last major printed price guide to dolls, not orthopedia, but printed. The answer is 5 years ago. When I wrote articles, older articles on the Rinker and Collectibles, say, how do you understand a market collapse? And my answer is, when 5 to 7 years go without a revision of a major price guide, the market's finished. And why? Because nobody wants to buy a price guide that tells their books went down. I had the privilege, the honor of doing the last 2 official price guide to collector plates. In the second to the last revision, we took prices down really hard. In the last revision, we took plates that had been priced 2 editions earlier at $25 to $30 down to $1 and $2, because we had eBay and the internet to deal with it, and the book didn't sell. Surprise, surprise.
But yeah, no, you're not going to spend.
And there hasn't been another edition that, you know, I was thinking of having at one point creating a pile of manure, and so when we put the name of the plate, we'd put a pile of manure aside of it to indicate its potential sale value, but we won't go there. Anyway, we've had a lot of fun again today. We've talked about a couple of key issues in the trade. We've taken a look at a couple of objects. Again, we want to encourage you to do that. I want to mention, too, as we go out, my Institute for the Study of Antiques and Collectibles in July. I mean, we've got 3 great 2-day courses, one on researching antiques and collectibles, very different from the authenticating course, one on paintings, watercolors and prints, and finally one on toys, games, and puzzles. Having a great time with that. Here's the information. Just go to my website, harryrinker.com, and click on the Institute logo, and you'll get all kinds of information. Also, Greg, we want to mention the newsletter is moving along. Do we have it? Do we have the first issue out now?
The new issue of the the revised Insider will go out tomorrow.
Oh, okay. And something for all our WorthPoint subscribers to look forward to. It's going to be a big plus.
That's right. If you do not subscribe to the newsletter and you'd like to, go to the WorthPoint articles page, and on the lower left-hand side, there's a sign up for the newsletter. Just put in your name and your email address, and you'll be receiving the Insider each week.
Yeah, and the Insider is going to be loaded with a lot of great stuff. I mean, it's going to have some great articles. We're going to do some Q&As in there, too, in the Insider, right?
Right.
And we're going to do Q&As. Go ahead.
Yeah, we will have the Q&As. We'll have some auction roundups. We'll have a feature discussing marks and challenge you to see if you can recognize the mark, and if you don't, we'll tell you what it is. And this is all to show.
Oh, you're not going to make them go digging into the marks page and find it themselves? Boy, that's cheating.
Well,
maybe you should just give them the search line and be done with it.
Right. Well, we'll give them the picture like it's on the bottom of their own item, and they can try and figure out what it is. I don't know.
Well, we're at the end of this session, but we'll be doing again this next Tuesday, which is the 26th at 2 p.m. So hopefully a number of people will tune in. Meanwhile, let's get some questions in for us, and we'll continue to have fun.
All right. Well, thank you, Harry, for your time again and your expertise, and we'll see you next week.
You will.
Yes, we will. All right. Until next week. Bye-bye.